Welcome in from your SUV, from your tractor or your ute, or maybe you're even riding your electric motorbike. But from wherever you are, you're with Alistair Moorhead and Glenn Judson, and this is the Al and Juddy Show. Well, what we want to do is reach out and provide you some technical information on a range of agricultural topics which may interest you, but to do it in a different way. Casual and comfortable format that allows you to listen where you want and when you want. This is intended for general information, and for more specific advice, contact your local Agricom rep.
Here we are with Lara for marketing. Hi, Lara.
Hey, how you going, guys?
Good, Lara.
Good. We've got some more questions have been sent through. First up, we've got one from Jason. Plenty of cheap seed around that is not certified. How can this backfire on farmers who are trying to save $1?
That's a really good question, Jason. And
Quite topical at the moment.
Yeah, it is topical at the moment. I think it is actually a question that's big enough and worthy enough for a podcast itself, and I think we will do that. So what I'd pretty much say is stand by, because we'll give a quite a broad and wide-ranging discussion on the topic. But at heart, the thing about be it uncertified seed or cheap seed is at heart you are buying something you do not have any true understanding of what it is. So I suppose everything from germination, endophyte, weed content, all these things are why it is cheap seed, why it is uncertified. So at heart you have no knowledge of what it is in real terms. You have a lot of trust, a whole lot of faith, and a whole lot of words that people use to give you confidence, but you have no knowledge of what you're actually about to sow. So I think that would be the primary answer, but stay tuned, because I think it could be a really cool podcast.
It would be a very good podcast. Look forward to it. And just one from Kaylee. For both Juddy and Al, what's your favourite breed of sheep and why is it a Romney?
Well, I'd have to disagree to start with that. My favourite sheep is not a Romney. Not to say that Romneys aren't great sheep, but if you had to have a personal favourite, mine's actually a Poll Dorset.
Oh, no.
And the reason that's the case is for two reasons. One is we actually had a Poll Dorset stud, so I'm very familiar with the breed, and I think they make terrific mothers. So they're my two reasons why Poll Dorset for me is one of the better breeds of sheep. Alistair?
Classic. Well, I'll go through my legacy with sheep breeds too, and it's not a Romney because I come from the east coast of Canterbury, and in the dry years, a Corriedale was a pretty impressive animal, and we came off a Corriedale stud. So that was my background. But I'm now a lifestyler. So really, I don't want too big an animal, and I'm more into cuteness now because they're just glorified lawnmowers in a lifestyle environment. So I'm really interested in the breed Kerry Hills, and if you go and look that up, I think that could be a really interesting lifestyle breed for me in the future.
Wonderful.
I think there was a test done somewhere that was looking at the IQ of sheep. And I'm not sure that actually the Corriedale came out particularly well on that. So just putting it out there.
Well, that's just getting insulting now. So let's move on.
If you have any questions, whether they're technical, serious, or anything in between, feel free to hit us up on our Facebook and Instagram pages, Agricom NZ, or at info@agricom.co.nz. Love to hear them.
Thanks, Lara.
Well, Alistair, looks like you've got a really good glow on there. Maybe it's your new moisturiser. Well, what are we talking about today?
Oh, thanks, Juddy. It's my great pleasure to introduce the CEO of PGW and Seeds, previously a consultant, a farmer, a horticulturalist, an arable seed grower, an agronomist, an agri-business leader, and our boss, John McKenzie, and welcome today.
Hopefully we'll still have a job at the end of this, so looking forward to the discussions.
What are we going to start off with today, Glenn?
Well, I thought we'd just move through a couple of questions in terms of understanding John's background and how he came to be in the seed business for as long as he's been here. Look at a little bit about some international markets and how they have kind of formed what we now know as the New Zealand seed industry, but some look back at that a little bit more, and then probably looking at how technology has changed through the period of time, the technology in the seed industry from its early beginnings through to what we see now, and maybe a little bit of a glimpse into the future about where that technology might take us, and some of the types of technology that we might be we might take advantage of.
Yeah, that's excellent. So welcome, John.
Thanks.
Yeah, listen. So quite a long list of titles, John, in terms of being a farmer and a horticulturist and a agribusiness leader. But from a personal point of view, I guess some really high-powered questions here. Your first car. What was your first car, John?
It was a Murray Thea.
Oh, great car. Yeah. Yep.
It was quite cheap. It cost me $700.
Right, and colour.
It was green. I didn't get a choice, Juddy.
Right. And I guess that car could probably tell a few stories, but we probably won't tell those today.
No, we won't go into that. I never got the pleasure of selling it.
Oh, lovely. Right, excellent. And next question is, how much sleep do you operate on? It's really interesting to talk about this because there are some people who do not operate unless they've had 8 hours of solid sleep. Others tend to work on a whole lot less. What's your sleeping habits?
Well, I can never sleep for more than 3 hours. So if I get 2 3-hour stints, that's good. But I can go to sleep anywhere at any time too. So that's how you catch up a few more hours.
Yeah. So. You're a bit scary in that space. I've watched you sleep in meetings only to wake up and ask the most astute questions I've ever seen. So it always raises the question.
That's just shutting your eyes. There's a difference between shutting your eyes and sleeping.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we learned that in the early days watching you.
Yeah, appreciate that. And of course, over your long career, you would have seen a lot of different products that have come through basically our business. And I guess it'd be interesting to see if you've got a favourite one that maybe isn't the best product but means a lot to you. Can you think of something like that?
Well, I've got two actually. One was greenstone ryegrass, which was a hybrid ryegrass. And in the days, and I started Agricom, the seed company, you actually had to bid with the DSIR to get the varieties. And I put in a marketing plan that we'd sell 50 tonne. And we sold over 500. So I like it because of the achievement, but also made quite a bit of money out of it. And then the other one I like is Samson ryegrass, and it's still in the market today. And perennial ryegrass, and had a guy called Brian Sampson working for me. And I told him I was going to name a bloody grass after him, and I did.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and that's that particular product is kind of been a cornerstone.
It got a new life when AR37 came along. So it's at the end of its journey from its genetics perspective, but it had AR1, and then it had AR37, and it's just been a very good, robust variety.
Yeah, and I think from a marketing point of view, I think that's what people see, that it's something you can rely on. It's not flashy, but it's something that's been stood the test of time and has been very reliable over time.
Well, I think in plant breeding you can do two things. You can try and breed Bell Merinos, and fluke it, or you can actually have the good solid germplasm that you can rely on and bring something through more reliable.
Which they
always say you're better to buy the worst ram from the best stud than the best ram from the worst stud. It's that type of thinking. And I
think the other thing
be very careful you're not being showy with your breeding programs, that things are going to breed true to time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the other point is that that particular product has been quite successful over a number of different environments. It goes south, it goes north.
And that was how it was bred. It was bred on a number of different locations.
Yeah, so it's very good.
Well, that's great, because the point with the introduction, John, is that you weren't always and haven't always been in the seed industry, and you've actually cut your teeth in a whole lot of different environments, and probably want to reach right back. You did your university days in the late 70s, is that right? And actually a lot of our very respected senior colleagues in our R&D business and other parts of the industry actually came out of that generation. One of our previous podcast interviewers, Steve Goldson, was of that time as well.
He's probably got grey hair like me.
Yeah, that's right. And so a lot of influential people came out of that time at university in the 70s and the late 70s. What did you get into when you left university?
Well, I guess the first thing was I never was going to go to university. Yeah. I was going to be a shearer because I wanted to be a farmer and I wanted to save money. Yeah. And I didn't think going to university was going to help. It didn't actually. I did spend quite a bit of money at university on the wrong things. But anyway, I think it was the best thing I ever did to go to university. But I still had that burning desire to be a farmer and no farming background behind me. So I became a farm consultant. And after 3 years, I had a go at farming and picked the wrong time to do it. Yeah. And I bought a farm that about a year later was worth half of what I paid for it. So that got me back into...
Well, the 80s were a pretty tough time for farming, full stop.
Back into what I can do off the farm to make some money. And so that's probably where I got into some of the things I got into, the live export trade and, you know.
And just to pick up on that, I think that's a really interesting point because actually when you say, university probably wasn't for you, but you learnt a lot there, and it might not have been in the lectures, but some of the other things that you learnt there in terms of, relationships and how important they are, and that, from a farming perspective that you've learnt some really important lessons, and that wasn't in the face of success, but more in some of the tough times, which I think when you look at successful leaders, in other industries, sometimes they've come from, or a lot of them have actually come from that, they've had those very basic backgrounds, and that success hasn't always been there. And I think we learn a lot through, or we should learn a lot through the tough times and the failures.
The university is not the be-all and end-all. You do learn how to think, but the university of life is more important. And I can remember when I was consulting, going to this farm, and he said, well, I thought I should get a consultant here because I wanted to know what all the Lincoln College theories are and da-da-da-da-da. And I said to him, well, I'm very sorry, but what I'm going to tell you is what my granddad taught me and what the head shepherd at Mount Peel Station taught me, not what I learned at Lincoln. But what I learned at Lincoln was how to think.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. I agree with that too. I that would be my message from a university perspective. And I hope universities keep remembering this, that their main purpose in life is to teach people how to think independently and not just rope learn, because actually life gets pretty tough when you think everything is as simple as a rope learned recipe.
But this is a general comment, and it doesn't necessarily, probably applies more outside of agriculture than in agriculture. But we've got into a bit of a psyche now that you're not worth anything unless you've been to university, and that's absolutely not right. The university of life is far more important, and you don't necessarily have to have that education to actually be successful.
Well, when I look at the consultancy, I mean that's a part of that, isn't it? Is that you when you have so many clients, you're interacting with them over years, you're absorbing all their experiences as you actually work with them on their farms. Yes. Quite a powerful way of generating experience.
Yeah. I guess I looked at it that with 50 clients, you were getting 50 farmer years in a year.
Yeah.
So, you do that for 3 or 4 years and you've been through.
Seen a lot.
Seen a couple of hundred farm years.
So that sort of leads on into your next part of that time. And you mentioned live exports at that stage. New Zealand's probably had quite a strong history of live export in the last 15 years of exports into the Middle East and into China and Asia with dairy exports, basically. But we're not really talking about that in the 80s, were we? We're talking about a different style of live export in that stage.
It was for breeding.
Yeah.
When I was heavily involved, and it was basically Corriedale Tutus to Eastern Europe or to South America. And of course, what you very quickly learn if you're the exporter is that if you actually just send something off to another part of the world and you don't follow up with actually how do you manage this and what do you do and how do you feed them and all that sort of stuff, it's not successful. And so I guess that's when I learned that you just can't transplant something and think it's going to work, because you've actually got to support it. And I'm sad to say in a lot of these cases, they weren't successful with their importations. In South America, they were because they had a history of sheep farming. But in Eastern Europe, and this is Romania and Yugoslavia primarily, they weren't, and it wasn't all that successful. But they were communist countries, and it was very, very interesting. Some of the things that.
So just with that, being a New Zealander trading in Eastern Europe, for example, what would be some of the big sort of experiences you took home of that whole interaction, basically trying to implement genetics from New Zealand, which, we are quite an efficient country. We've created pretty strong systems over time in our environment, and now we're taking our genetics to another part of the world, like you're just saying, trying to transplant things. What was the interactions, take-home messages from being a New Zealander in that trade?
Well, I think what you realise is that you've got to keep your messages really simple. You've got a language thing for starters, and often you're working through an interpreter, so you've actually got to be simple enough in your message for the interpreter to understand, because that person's probably not an agricultural person, and then you're relying on getting it through. So you realise that you've really got to be crunchy with your messages. And I often sit even now in things when we're in English or here in New Zealand or elsewhere and think people are just making it too complicated. You just got to work out what are the punchy points that people will take on and remember, because otherwise you just make it too complicated for them and they're not going to do it.
And I guess the other thing is there must be an appreciation of the cultural aspects of the country you're selling into, that you need to understand, who you're selling to in terms of getting that success.
Yes. Well, I didn't used to do the sales deals. I used to do all the consolidation, buy the sheep, feedlot them, export them, be over there for the receival. So I didn't actually do the deals because they were government to government type deals. But what I can tell you, there's a glass of water here. At a lot of the meetings in Eastern Europe, it would be Slipovich, which is a spirits, and you didn't drink it. You put it in the pot plants or worked out how to get it. Because you weren't any good to anybody if you...
Right.
Yeah, very different way of approaching things.
That actually brings me into the South American one, because I've had that bit of advice regarding too many pisco sours when you arrive in Chile, for example. You've got to keep it pretty... above boards. But I followed you actually to South America when I first started travelling over there. And so you've had a lot of experience travelling into that world as well. And I suppose that comes back to Glenn's statement before. We have a lot of colleagues in South America. We've had a lot of amazing experiences and great times, but there's a lot to be learned about being New Zealanders working in South America over time. And I think you've probably had vastly more experience of that than me. So what were some of your experiences?
Well, I think the first thing, and I probably should have said that when you asked me about Eastern Europe, but the first thing is you can't transplant something. You've actually got to understand where you are with the latitude and what might work and what might not work. So you just can't transplant New Zealand. If you actually look at lots of parts of South America, you're actually more transplanting Australia. You're transplanting
New South Wales,
northern New South Wales. But what you can transplant is the way a Kiwi thinks. And, if you roll it back, how a Kiwi thinks is these are the resources I've got and how do I make the best of it? It's the number 8 wire bind to twine mentality of people that came out here and settled this country 150 years ago. It's the way we think. But that doesn't mean that what you do here, the outcome of that thinking, is what you should do somewhere else. And you go to those places, and if you can go once and you can go in the spring and you think, well, why don't they do this? And you think, silly buggers, they should do this. But then you go back at another time and then you realise why they don't do it, because actually you've missed something. So you've got to be really, really careful that you understand what you're talking about and understand the challenges. And you before you actually start to dish out. And there's been some big mistakes made where people have, farm systems. Uruguay, for example, tried to transplant New Zealand farming systems, and they got it wrong because, as I said, we were talking about a climate more like northern New South Wales, and the summer heat was the bit we don't have in New Zealand. So you've really, really got to understand what you're dealing with. You get down in the south of Chile. It's very interesting. I know you've been there too, in that 9th and 10th region of Chile. It's very similar to New Zealand, but there's things that it's not too. But I think there, it's the people. And I can remember at Lincoln we used to get lectured about the personal factor is everything. We got told about, when you're advising or whatever, you got to take into account the personal factor. I used to sit there and think, this is just a lot of cobswobble. And because I always used to think, well, what I would do if it was me when you saw a situation. And then when I got advising, I realised it's everything. Because if you can't get somebody to do it, it won't happen.
Yeah.
And that's the same applies to South America. It applies to all technology extension. If you can't get someone else to see what to do and implement it, well, it won't work. And that's the personal factor. And that's why you have that triangle of adopters and followers and all the rest of it. And I know when I was advising, the people that were the most fun to deal with were the really good guys that you didn't have to give a recipe, because they were smart enough to work out what are the things that you said you could be more challenging to them. Because what are the things that you said that they said, oh yeah, I can pick that up and run with it. And what are the things that you said they said, well, that doesn't apply to me, and they could work it out. Whereas if you're working with someone who wasn't as capable, you just dished up a recipe and they did it and they didn't fine tune it for the circumstances, and it could be a disaster, So
I've watched those exact observations unfold in my experience in South America since the mid-teens, and I've watched amazing progress in grazing management and a whole lot of systems over time occur through all the good people we work with over there. But, it's so obvious that it is actually small steps, and they have to get to the same place themselves because they've got staff and different people interacting at different levels, very, very intelligent environment. They're all trained. My colleagues and our colleagues and the people we work with are all trained to very, very high levels, but the implementation has always been the crunch of bringing different cultures together as people implement things based on their resources and their structures.
But part of that also in South America is there's a huge gap between the people who've been educated and are promoting the technologies and the guys on the farm.
Yeah,
it's a huge gap,
and that's where we got to bridge that.
And you've got this challenge over there, where everybody wants to live in the city, so they're not actually they turn up on the farm for a day or two, telling the employees what to do, but actually are not there long enough to know. So there's a gap in their understanding of what actually
and that's really
happens.
important for us to understand, because that's a cultural thing.
Yeah, but we're very hands-on in New Zealand. The good thing is our educated people are on the farms. That's why we're such a good adopters of technology, because the people are there fine-tuning it, not going back to the city and coming out to their farm once a week, to collect the check.
Yeah, and it strikes me that a key component of making change on farm or implementing new systems is the ability to look at that to see what that tweak needs to be. So it's not a recipe and it's just going to go. It's actually being able to do something and then interpret what actually the outcome was and how we can optimize that. And that's really important. If you're just giving a recipe and you just run over and over again, you can't do that. And I know...
And you also have to make sure that they understand the value that it's going to add. Because if you can get the farmer to understand the value that it's going to add, he'll work out for himself far better than you will how he's going to extract that value.
Yeah, and that's, again, that idea that you can give some of the answer and they'll work out the rest, because you can't actually give the full answer because you don't understand
their
the
individual
constraints.
Farm.
Yeah, the whole interaction with staff, resources. No, I look back on that travel, and I actually learnt this pretty early on because I've spent a lot of time in Australia as well, and I worked out very, very early in the piece that what you always own yourself is your personal experiences and IP, a group of expectations. You have a, if you're good at observing what all the paths you've walked in life, you've developed expectations, you develop awarenesses of what things should be and how they should look. But you really got to give up all your examples and your personal baggage when you enter other people's worlds, because all you can bring with you is your expectations about how things should behave. And as I say, they need to be molded based on, your volcanic soils, your acidity, your staffing.
But all you're doing, Al, is you're just cross-pollinating.
That's right.
When I was a consultant with 50 farmers, I went round the different farmers and I transferred ideas from one place to another, not always in one direction. You can always learn something from somebody. When you actually get offshore and you move around, or even when you move around, you're transferring ideas, you're cross-pollinating, and then you're letting the marketplace or the individual pick up that idea that you've shared with them and to see if it'll work or not. Well, sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. And sometimes the things that you think will work don't.
Yeah,
and sometimes the things you think that might not are actually a lot more successful than you.
I think it's a really important understanding that, because, I think it's the really prescriptive and dominating sort of approach to say, you must do this. This is exactly how it's going to work. This is exactly what you need to do to be successful. I think is a really strong message, is that cross-pollination is the planting of ideas that really grow based on all the resources that you have individually. And I feel that's probably a really nice message.
But you can roll that back to New Zealand
and
think about chicory or think about plantain.
Yeah.
And you think about when those things were developed probably 30 plus years ago, but more than that, and how we thought we would use them and how we're using them now.
Yeah.
It's quite different.
They've evolved.
Who would have thought that chicory would be used as a summer feed like brassicas on dairy farms in the North Island when it was first developed? It was more a story about finishing lambs and anthelmintic properties and da-da-da-da-da. It was never about...
part of a pasture mix.
Well, So, and yes, in the pasture mix rather than a straight, So the farmers get it and they
I think it was...
They tell you what
literally
works.
It took us over 10 years to be brave enough to put plantain as a straight crop. Literally, because it was just 1 kg in a pasture mix to create diversity. So when I look at the evolution of...
And now we're talking about plantain for a completely different reason
outcomes.
of what we ever thought.
And I think we'll come on to that later in terms of this technology. And one of those ways of thinking is looking at products that we have now and thinking about different ways to use those. And I think the whole realization that these are farm systems and the forages that we put into those are kind of should be seen as solutions to some of the problems and opportunities. When you start thinking about that, then we do have some, there's some really good ideas where we might be able to use some products that we use in one way and use them a completely different way if we're thinking not them as a forage, but as part of a farm system. Just want to go back because I think there's a really lovely story about this cross-pollination of information, and I think it came out of South America where the farmer's looking over the fence to see what his neighbour's doing, and I think it's a lovely story because there's a couple of aspects of that are I think are really good messages.
Yes. Well, I was telling you one day, Al, in South America, in Uruguay actually, the company started a small demonstration area of how you actually should graze pastures with beef animals. And the target was to get to, could you get to 1,000 kilograms of meat per hectare? And so all the farmers were watching around about, what these silly fellas were doing. And anyway, it turned out that one of the cattle beasts that they were doing the trial with was blind. Well, partly blind, and it kept on walking into the electric fences. So they took the lids of the ice stream containers, cut them through to the centre and hung it on the electric fence every wee bit so that the cattle beast could see because it couldn't see the wire. And you know what? The farmers roundabout started to do the same thing to their fences. They didn't know why, but those crazy guys implementing the technology from New Zealand did that. So it must be part of the solution. So that's what they did.
Which is a good story. A great story of way
you don't
people...
know why, but they're doing it, so we will too. Which then means you've got followers. That's good, isn't it?
Yeah, fast followers. Yeah. So sometimes we don't know why we're doing that, but no, it's a lovely story. I guess if we move on talking about technology, and I guess you probably bring a great perspective to this discussion around the fact that you've been in the industry for so long and seen a lot of technology over time that, in terms of different pasture species, what we might put on the outside of seed, some of the different ways we use seed. in terms of, it'd be good to get a perspective on where you see technology has worked and where it hasn't worked, and maybe why that's been the case.
Well, I guess that you go right back to 40 years ago when the government was breeding the public varieties and PVR had just come into play. At the end of the day, in those days, seed companies weren't selling technology. They were just selling seed. And all that mattered was what was the purity and what was the germination. That's what they were selling. And I guess I was lucky enough to be around and started Agricom at the time when the world was starting to wake up, or we were starting to wake up a wee bit, and what did what you're planting, what did it do? And so we're in the world then of 100% lambing and 12 kilo lambs. And it was a barrier. And, I can remember Waitaki, which was a meat company, came out and they had what they called these WX lambs. And the target was to get to 15 kilos. And everybody said, well, you couldn't get to 15 kilos. It wasn't possible. Well, you know why it wasn't possible? Because our pastures were full of endophite toxins, and the animals wouldn't grow. So we actually had to work out how could you do that. My son told me yesterday we sent lambs to the works and they averaged 26.04 kilos. Wow. So that was impossible 40 years ago. So we had to understand the problem, and then we had to work out what was the technology that we needed to bring through to deal with that problem. And, there was a whole story around animal performance, live weight gain per day on different species and all those sort of things. So now the world's quite different. Now seed companies are actually providing solutions, not just, yes, the seed has to have the right purity and the germination, but that's not what you're selling. That's a given now. Now you're actually, what are the solutions that you can come up with for the problems that the farmer might have, or the opportunities that the farmer might have?
And I think it really is the context that people probably need to understand, is that in the New Zealand landscape, from one end of the country to the other, was covered in a primary grass, which had a unique and standard endophyte. It was literally a common endophyte from one end of New Zealand to the other, and that common endophyte was full of alkaloids, of which two of them are quite toxic and are quite highly influential on animal performance. So when we're discussing that you couldn't break these live weight gain barriers, we're discussing summer ill thrift, which was identified in the late 70s, early 80s to be caused by this endophyte. It was only discovered pretty much on your watches as you guys were coming out of university. It pretty much was identified as the problem for this summer ill thrift, where lambs and livestock were actually actively losing weight through the summer months.
And I can remember when we did all the trials with the first endophyte that was commercialised, and there was nothing wrong with it other than the fact we gave it the wrong name, which was endosafe, which was probably not how you should have positioned it, because nothing you can ever say is completely safe. But anyway, we were doing these trials with endosafe, and I can remember we had all the different, we had different cultivars with different endophytes in them. And one of the endophytes we had in one of the trials was Ruanui with the old North Canterbury endophyte. Well, you know what? That was so toxic that you couldn't leave these lambs on the trial. You had to take them off because it would kill them. I mean, but it was a marvellous endophyte for persistence of ryegrass, but it was doing absolutely the wrong thing on farm for animal performance.
Well, that was what probably started to emerge as this technology started to develop, because you played a major role in being involved in the development of this, the investment in these technologies over the last 35, almost 40 years. But that really is the issue with those endophytes, is that they are ecotypes, and when breeders go back into the environment to select the biggest, the best looking grasses from the environment, back in the day, they literally had the advantage of being highly toxic to the animals that were putting all the stress on them. So ecotype breeding in New Zealand became very, very difficult. Actually, Samson was one of the last true ecotype genetics that we discussed earlier, where it was selected from over something like between 18 and 23 different sites in New Zealand and brought through. But the standard endophyte...
It's only the DSI that could have afforded to do that.
Exactly. It's so tricky back in the day. But the reality is if you did that today, you would be going back to plants that animals were literally rejecting, which protected the plant, made them look better, and you would be actively selecting against it. And so that was the flaw of the past. And we actually had to stop doing ecotype breeding in New Zealand because of the best plants tend to be the most toxic. So
I think the endophyte story is a really interesting one, and given you would say that largely that's been a huge success in terms of shifting pastures from something that we find very difficult to grow animals through to situations now where we've got this great degree of persistency and also animal performance. Some of the key in terms of success, what do we think that some of the key things of that program were in terms of why was that so successful? I guess for me, one of them appears to be that the problem was well defined, that actually people recognised that this was a problem, and to move on, we needed to fix that. So
it went through some steps. So the first step, when we recognised that the toxicity of the endophyte was a problem, we went to the well, you need to have endophyte free, either tall fescue or ryegrass with no endophyte. Well, tall fescue was hard to manage, and ryegrass with no endophyte didn't persist, except in Southland. So straight away, to get the animal performance, you traded off the persistence. So then there's a great economic value story to say, well, if you could get the persistence back, but you got the animal performance as well, then where would you be? So the next thing was AR1, which was soft from an agronomic perspective, but very good from the animal performance perspective. But then what that didn't do, it didn't cope with all the range of pests that we've got in this country. So then we had to get something which I say is a little bit more dirty or a bit more agronomically robust, which wasn't perfect for the animals, but was a hell of a lot better than the
system
wild type
as a whole.
Exactly. So, there was a journey. You wouldn't have been able to get from where we were to AR37 if you hadn't gone through those steps, because you've got to educate the marketplace and da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da-da. The challenge is that how do you find these things? Because basically you're looking for needles in a haystack. How do you go and find an endophyte that's got the right alkaloid profile? And the exciting thing now, and we're investing in this, and it's a joint program with MB and AgResearch and so forth, we are investing in a gene editing program with endophytes, which is basically, it's called Design an Endophyte, and that's what it is. You can actually sit there now and knock out a gene and actually get what you want, because I don't think in the new world, the next iteration, we'll be able to find these needles in a haystack. We actually need to start.
We've mined the landscape quite heavily.
We've mined it there's nothing left. There's no gold left there. Yeah. We're going to have to be smarter about how we find it. And of course, at this point in time in this country, one of the few countries in the world that you can't do gene editing.
Yeah.
We can't operate. We have got ryegrass plants with these gene-edited endophytes growing in Australia. You can do it in Australia, but we can't do it here.
Actually, I'll jump in here because I think this is a really it's a couple of very different scenarios associated with investing over time, because actually what you invest in today is not what's here today. You're trying to create a future and future opportunities. I would really like to delve into some of the things that we've invested in that haven't really worked, to just give some insight, probably back into to give the audience a bit of a vibe about how important tools will be and are in the future, because it shows you how expensive and inefficient traditional systems have been. And, I've been involved with both of the things that haven't worked, that you've experienced over time, and that's one of them.
Well, one was getting the lowline
endophytes
into
ryegrass,
lowline producing endophytes into, so they're expressed in the roots of ryegrass, mainly to combat grass crop.
Yeah,
and I don't know, we've banged our head against a brick wall for 20 years trying to achieve that by putting a tall fescue endophyte into a ryegrass, which was a challenge in itself.
Meadow fescue,
and then we couldn't get the expression that we wanted. I still think probably in the design and endophyte world, we may well be able to achieve that one day, but that would be huge for the farming industry in New Zealand.
I'll just define it because just for people that don't understand it. So the key is we have a specific ryegrass endophyte that's evolved with it called Epicloa, and we've got other species of grasses that they are historically related to ryegrass, and one is tall fescue and the other is meadow fescue. They both carry endophytes. Both of them are lowline producers, but particularly the meadow fescue produces the lowlines, which are very animal safe, but produces them in high enough concentrations and with its physiology that it actually circulates them in the roots in great concentrations, which means that they're really quite effective against root feeding bugs.
And grass scrub is a root feeder.
Yeah, and so grass scrubs are really hard to target insects.
And we're losing a lot of the arsenal we've got to deal with grass scrubs.
So the holy...
But at this stage...
It would be the holy grail, wouldn't it?
We haven't cracked it. Another one we haven't cracked is, we are getting there, not quite the way we thought, but... it was interspecific crosses between white clover and Caucasian clover,
distantly related
trying
species.
to actually get better rooting systems, more persistence, Really, really hard to crack that in terms of the science of it, but it's been really hard to crack that in terms of actually getting an effective product. And I can remember one of my partners telling me once, John, we could buy a building in the square in Christchurch. What you spent, probably whether we would have come down on the earthquakes, probably. But,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For what you've spent on this intraspecific clover, we are actually now starting to crack it a different way with different species other than Caucasian.
Other related species,
that we're crossing. But again, it's a needle in the haystack story, really, because you're actually saying, well, I want to bring genes from another clover plant into white clover. But you've got to cross and get everything. Yeah. So you start to think there's more precise technologies that are GM that you could actually go and say, well, that's what I want. Let's put it in here. And again, we can't do that sort of stuff. So you actually stand there and say, well, what do we really want to be here? Do we want to actually solve the problems that are out there for the next generation? A lot of these are environmental problems and so forth. Do we want to solve those problems? Well, if we want to solve those problems, give us the tools to do it. Absolutely. Because we need more efficient plants. We need more frugal plants. There's a whole lot of things that we need that we're just not going to get the old way.
And I think one of the challenges and the opportunities actually with some of the new technology is we'll get there faster.
A lot faster.
And we will get, and I think the other thing is we'll get there and the products will be quite precise and clean. Whereas in the past, we've been dealing with nature and nature's not precise and clean. And so if we look back on the stuff that hasn't worked, and I'd say hasn't worked yet, it looks like
the journey's been a lot longer than we thought.
And so maybe, and the point where the endophytes have worked, and we've said the reason they've worked is that we've the problem's been well defined, and then we've worked through a series of steps to get to that end product, and we've said, wow, that's really good. It looks like the ones that haven't worked, right? The problem's been well defined. What we want is still what we want, but that journey's a little longer. And I guess the that old adage, if you're going to fail quickly and move on, that's very difficult actually. And when we're in a breeding program, because 10 years is a short time in this game.
But it's also, and I'm guilty of this when I talk to people, because I'm getting a bit old in the tooth now. But someone will say something and you'll say, well, that didn't work, so don't bother. But the bit that you miss is that today there's something else that you can bring to bear on that problem that will make it work, And so that's part of this journey of you've got to remember the environment changes, the tools that you've got to deal with these things changes, and over time we will crack these things because you've got something else that will make it work. So you discarded it last time, but hey, let's come back here because we've got something else now. That applies to farm systems, it applies to lots of things,
What freaks me out at the moment, I think this is a really valid point, is that I think a lot of people, we're seeing so much change occur, and I'm fascinated by your view on this, because our technology, what we've just discussed is two sets of, moderate failures to date around intraspecific crosses with white clover to get true expressions and true differences, and also lowlines, particularly in ryegrass, circulating in roots at high enough levels to be effective against root feeders. Now, those two projects have been going for closing in on 25 years now. And so this point is that everything is moving so fast. I have never seen our world and all the circumstances and the need for change to be, driven so quickly. And yet I've just described systems that have taken 25 years to work out that we can't do it with the set of tools and the traditional techniques that we had in those moments. And I sort of
on the intraspecific hybrids, we are there after 25 years. But on the lowland expression, we've still got a way to go.
Yeah, but we have pivoted on those too.
We have,
and we've looked at different species. And I think just from an audience perspective, what we are discussing is not true GMO, even discussing the roles of technology in the future, because, for example, remember what I said is that fescue and metafescue are actually distantly evolutionarily related to ryegrass, so they're close in evolutionary terms. Likewise, when we're discussing white clover, a lot of these trifolium are related historically.
If you can cross them without other techniques, other breeding techniques, sometimes the crosses are not easy to do, but if you can cross them, you're just making the shandy of all the genes. So it's not.
The difference now is doing it with precision and doing it with aims and objectives.
And going for the ones that you want and not the genes that you don't.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Spending 20 years trying to find out.
But anyway, we can't do that in New Zealand right now, so they're not solutions for us today. So in life, you've got to concentrate on the stuff that you can do, have an eye on what you might want to do in the future, but concentrate on the stuff that you you can do. There's been lots of successes that we've had in one of the successes, and it's not in the Agricom portfolio, I know, but it's been clean crop brassicas.
Yes.
That's been a huge success, getting a herbicide tolerant range of brassicas. And why is that so important? Because it takes the risk. The winter feed, as you guys know, in New Zealand farming systems, especially in the South Island, is so important. Your success of the year is often in how good your winter feed crop is. So if you can actually do that properly, and then of course now with all the environmental legislations we've got, the higher yield that you can grow on a smaller area is a lot better for the farmer, and also a lot more efficient in the cost per kilogram of dry matter of that feed. So that's been really, really a good example of something that's been really successful.
From an R&D perspective, just taking a slightly different slant on this, some of the discoveries, we've got these programs that we're working away with. Sometimes some of these discoveries come from really left field, where people are given the opportunity to go and play and do something. How important do you think, having a part of a program that you can just go away and play is?
I think it's everything. I mean, we've been through a cycle. If you go back years and years ago, I think 40 or 50 years ago, there was a hell of a lot of playing being done and not enough target. And so you think when the Crown got out of its plant breeding investment and said that needs to be done with industry and it needs to be what the market needs and and the right signals need to be sent, that was what happened. So then, we got very prescriptive. You need to do this, and the marketplace needs to tell you what you want. Well, some of the biggest things that have happened, the marketplace would not have been capable of telling the scientists this is what you need to do. So I say you have to let people play in the sandpit. You have to have an element of prescriptive, and you have to have an element of people playing in the sandpit. Sometimes it's the same person that can be 70% of their time prescriptive and 30% sandpit. Sometimes you actually are more successful. The sandpit type of guy will never actually deliver something tomorrow. So they're two different sort of people. Yes. But in your whole R&D investment, you need to make sure you've got both. It's one of the reasons why, as a company, we have formed Grasslands Innovations, a joint venture with AgResearch, and Forage Innovations, a joint venture with Plant and Food, because in doing that, at our end, the company end, we can be a bit more prescriptive about what we want our people to do, and the Crown research institutes can be a bit more visionary in terms of the sandpit type of things. Or I often talk about they can be on the other side of the valley of death doing the stuff that's got a lot of risk that a private company can't afford to do. And so because there's a lot of failures in that stuff, and if a private company tries to cover the cost of the R&D on the things that failed, you just have to charge far too much for the things that don't fail. So there has to be the Crown and the industry, there has to be a mechanism for dealing with that risk. But if you don't take the risk, you won't get the new stuff.
You don't get the step
But
change.
you can't recover it all on the products that are successful. There's got to be something that's just written off,
Yep.
to get you there.
A true investment.
Yeah.
And then there's one other thing, and I this is probably the bit that makes all this work. So we've got some prescriptive part of the program. We've got some blue skies or some guys playing in the sandpit, as you say, John. And then I think the other bit is you've got these practitioners who understand farming systems, they understand the challenges, and can look into the sandpit and give people context.
That's a really, really good point, Glenn. And it's one of the things that really worries me in our company today, because I've been around when I was in the Agricom days, I was the company. I was A to Z. I could see it, the farming piece, I could see the R&D piece, and I could say, I can make that work. Now what I worry about in our company is how can the company see from A to Z? Because a lot of the cases we haven't got any individual that can actually see from A to Z. You guys are a bit unique in that respect, but you can't see all the way because you don't know everything that's going on inside the R&D tent. You got a pretty good view here. So what we've got to do in this company, in our company now, we've got to make sure that you can't do it any longer in one person's head, but we have to make sure we've got the forum of the people talking together and working with each other so you can see that's what's there in the sandpit, and that's the problem. And yes, I could make it work. Because, I go back to AR37, and quite honestly, and I don't want to be smart about this, but if I hadn't said I could make AR37 work, it would not be there today. Because Ag Research were going to reject it because it had an element of risk. And, what I could see is that having something that was not robust enough agronomically was not going to fly. We needed something that was more robust agronomically, and you could trade the risk off. But because I could see A to Z, if I hadn't been able to see A to Z, we never would have run with that, Yeah. And so how do we get A to Z in the new world as it gets more complicated? There's a lot more going on. That's when you've got to mingle people together. You've got to have those forums. You've got to discuss it. Takes a lot more time. But if you don't do that, you won't actually get the right solutions.
Yeah, and I think the challenge here is, someone's in the sandpit, someone's failure in the right context could be a roaring success. And it actually takes those different contexts. But as you say, you've got to have those people knowing what's there.
Looking at it through a different lens.
Absolutely. And I think that's, again, when we come to some of some of the products where we've found a new job for them or a new life for them, it's because someone's recognised that there are some other elements that that we haven't considered in some of these products, and we've got a new job. And some of those if we're looking into the future, there's some things there that we don't know. And there's going to be some challenges that come forward, and I guess it's about trying to find solutions for those, trying to pick what we might need, because this game's a long game.
And I think we've got to be very careful, and I was talking to someone the other day about this, but we've got to be very careful that we're not running yesterday's race, So we've been very successful over the last 20 years, breeding for more dry matter production, breeding for performance on the shoulders of the season, but that might not be what will get us there for tomorrow, So we've got to be really careful. And we've been doing things based on the fact that we can modify the environment with irrigation and fertiliser and Well, I think the opportunities to modify the environment are being diminished. It's a lot harder to put in irrigation schemes and get water and all that sort of stuff. We've actually got to start more to say, what's the environment that we've got? And we all know that's changing too with climate change. But what's the environment that we've got? And what are the plants that can cope with that environment and be resilient in that environment? And what are the farming systems that can be built to do that? And there are different systems to absolutely just maximise dry matter production. They're very different systems.
Anything from nutritional content to environmental impacts, and with climate change impacting and changing our zones, it's a big deal. I think this still comes back because we are in such a long-term industry, and I still keep coming back to the speed of everything. Everyone wants stuff to change, and I still can't help but feel your investments in our businesses, investments in future technologies, particularly offshore, with the hope that New Zealand will recognise that we cannot change anything fast. Fast in our level of industry is between 15 and 20 years. And I just don't think everyone quite gets that to meet the descriptions that you've all both been raising. It is a 20-year outcome. And anything we can make that a 15-year outcome would be amazing. Or even a 10-year outcome. But 10-year is literally the shortest we can do anything in our
to make
industry.
A difference. Yeah.
And so,
but the other aspect of that, Al, is, and you've been on the other side of the fence from me on this, but what happens when you fail?
Yeah.
So, I look at Pine Gall Guinness, and why did Pine Gall Guinness buy Agricom? Pine Gall Guinness bought Agricom because it failed to recognise the importance of the end-of-fight technology. And by the time Pine Guinness woke up, it was too late. And to catch up, it had to go and buy another business. And so, there's failure to deliver technology in the marketplace, but failure can also mean quite significant things actually have to happen with some of the organisations to deal with that.
So there's a moving forward, there's going to be a lot of technology that comes to we become aware of a lot of that technology. Give me a couple of things that you look for in terms of working out whether you think it's a technology that could have some legs and could succeed. What are the things that you look for if someone says, here's a great piece of technology?
Well, I think you have to look at what will it provide a solution. You have to understand what are the problems that are out there. And when you're looking for technology, you've always got that framework. What are the problems that you're trying to deal with? Now, remember, I'm not on farm like I used to be, and I don't understand that. I still have a reasonable perspective because I am a farmer, first and foremost, who happen to get into the seed industry. But, you guys who are out on farm every day understand that stuff better. But you've got to understand what are the problems. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, you just scan what's going on and could you make that work? Yeah. And then you've actually got the key thing here is the farmer can't be the risk taker. You've actually got to work out a way that if you think you have found something, you've got to work out a way that you can take that risk and show the farmer, here's a package and I've done it. Not on a bloody 5 by 2 metre plot, actually in a farming system. Because there's too much risk in farming today to go off chasing on something. Most people don't have the balance sheets to be able to do that. Chase something and take that risk. So that's the second piece of it is, well, if you think you're so smart that you can work out how to provide the solution, do it yourself first before you tell someone else. So again, that delays the journey because,
absolutely.
It might be available, but you can't actually just say do it tomorrow. You've actually got to get 2 or 3 years of comfort. And, where I sit, I'm not going to be involved in any seed company that takes stuff to market that it hasn't worked out the positioning and the value proposition to the farmer, because that is the farmer is not our research lab, we've got to take products to the farmer that they know are going to work.
Super important message of the way we've invested both in future technologies, but also in our R&D platform, our investment in the Marshdale beef unit, our investment in animal safety testing, which is a huge investment every year, which is very much what our business is.
And people say we don't need to do that, but we've been caught left field before, and and it shouldn't stop with the animal testing at the plot level. There should be some on-farm stuff, because it could be a different environment that creates a different scenario. So
and that's the point. We do appreciate farmers who work with us and take that first step with us too, because many of those first adopters and our very key supporters, they do get a first opportunity to build these systems with us. We've done it both from the arable side, with our key arable growing partners have helped us crack different and hard to grow species, right through to getting our new products onto farm. And it is a bit of a journey. It is very important though that we don't unload that risk. And I do think there's elements such as the regenerative ag discussion, which has actually said, no, as a farmer, you take all the risk, you walk that path, and you work out whether it works for you. So I suppose there's these things that we have to understand. Our role has been to try and provide the greatest level of success, greatest level of confidence. And so sometimes you get differing messages about this in the industry as well, which is quite common.
One last question from me, John. Let's just have a little peek into the future, without being terribly specific. What do you think would be what's one product or project that you think might be something that will be quite influential in the future in terms of seed industry?
Okay, well, this one's GM. It's condensed tannins in white clover. We have now got white clover plants that have got the condensed tannins that will make a huge difference to bloat, but more importantly will make a huge difference to methane emission. Like I'm talking 15% type levels. And we actually have those white clover plants now planted out under OGTR regulations in Australia. So, we're well on the way. Stuff. It's really, really exciting. If we want to get something that'll make a difference in the environmental piece for animals, it's the one. And it's really exciting.
I believe that it really is.
I think, people talk about it being the holy grail, and I don't think that's an exaggeration.
Yeah. I believe in it so much because white clover, as we've discussed in previous discussions, is such an important impact on New Zealand agriculture. And I feel this is the thing about reaching into technology from around the world. There's many others that can multiply it and do it at much greater scale. But that's one that we can do very strongly in New Zealand that has an impact on New Zealand. And it needs the less bag nitrogen,
so that's got to be a good thing.
As well.
Isn't it interesting? And it's a point well made here because, we've said in this podcast, maybe in the future we won't be breeding for dry matter yield, and we've got this new plant and all aspects of it have got nothing necessarily to do with how well it grows or how much it produces. And so I think that's a really clear message.
That's what the new world might look like.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the ability to control bloat from an animal welfare is, if it was just that, it would still be very useful to have this plant.
But this is a lot more than that.
But the fact that it is also able to reduce methane, and that it will also have a very profound effect in the animal as well. I think in all of that, and we haven't even talked about what we used to talk about in the old world as being dry matter production or some of those agronomic aspects. So I think it's a point well made.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Juddy, we need to wrap it up now, and. Would you like to do a bit of a summary?
Yeah, quick summary. So I guess it's been great having you and John. I think you've given us
You've both lost your jobs in the process today.
I'm worried about that. Yeah. I think this has been a really unique opportunity because we've had someone who has been in the seed industry a long time, but you've given us a real flavour of both being within a seed company, but also being a consultant, working overseas, working in New Zealand, and some of the key aspects of that lead to either success or failure. And I think the nice thing about it, from what I can see, is that you've learned from the stuff that hasn't gone so well, and probably less likely to happen. And the other nice thing is that, in your day-to-day job, I think you impart that experience really well. So we don't need to be making the same mistakes that you've made as long as we listen to you. So I think it was really good. I think the other other really interesting part about that was the talk of this technology and how we might move forward and what is the old world and what is looking like the new world and the demands that come from that. So I think it's been a really I've enjoyed that trip through that technology session. So I think
that's good, Juddy. And I'd probably only expand on it one more thing, and I have a lot of empathy for it. It is the fact that we can develop a lot of experience, but we can't transplant it everywhere. I think there's some really strong messages from your experience in Eastern Europe and South America. And I think that is, we can help the pollination process, we can share, but we can't transplant things in different landscapes. And I feel that's a really strong message as well. And also the investment in the sandpit. I quite like that analogy, blue sky. We think we have lots of ideas, Juddy, but the reality is we don't know what we don't know. And if you don't invest in a proportion of your quite significant investment in technologies in blue sky, future thinking for future solutions, and then the big message I took also from that, because it's close to my heart as well, is that you still need to find the interaction within your networks so that the right people can see into the sandpit and to see into the blue sky technology, because they may not be the same person.
And the guys in the sandpit can see into the real world on farm.
Yeah. And have those moments as well. So, look, I really enjoyed that. So thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Yeah, well, looks like I've got a CV to tidy up, so I better go. Catch you later.
See ya.